47 minutes until humanity destroys the galaxy. Dr. Zeth'kar's 6 eyes stared at the impossible number, his primary appendages frozen over controls that had never lied to him. Not once in 3,000 years, the countdown didn't care about his disbelief. 46 minutes, 58 seconds. 46 minutes, 57 seconds. His algorithms had predicted the Vex rebellion 3 years early, identified the perfect Quantaran heir, but now they screamed impossibility at him. On the massive central display, Ambassador James Miller sat calmly in a routine diplomatic meeting on Earth, completely unaware that his next words would trigger the greatest catastrophe in galactic history. Miller's face brightened with satisfaction, while his eyes remained calculating. His posture relaxed, while his hands stayed ready for decisive action. Zeth'kar's thermal sensors detected the human's unchanged body temperature impossible during high-stress negotiation for any known species. Impossible, Zeth'kar whispered through his tertiary breathing slits. The probability matrices were screaming. Mathematical certainty had become mathematical chaos. If Miller said yes to the trade agreement, economic collapse would follow within 6 months, leading to resource wars. If he said no, the diplomatic incident would escalate into military action within 2 months. If he said maybe, the uncertainty cascade would destabilize 3 star systems within 3 weeks. But Miller was human. And humans. Zeth'kar was about to learn the universe's most terrifying secret. The countdown continued its merciless advance. 45 minutes, 17 seconds. 45 minutes, 16 seconds. His research files flickered to life, displaying 3 months of impossible data. 15 predictions, 15 impossible failures. Martinez invented Option Z. Kim created joint oversight from nothing. Williams chose certain death over probable survival and lived. Every human prediction hadn't just been wrong, it had been catastrophically, impossibly wrong. Humans consistently chose options that didn't exist in his mathematical models. Ambassador Miller leaned forward in his chair, opening his mouth to speak, and Zeth'kar realized with crystalline terror that his models weren't predicting the future, they were showing him exactly why the Council had banned human psychological research. What if humans weren't breaking his predictions? What if they were seeing through them? 3 months earlier, Dr. Zeth'kar had been the galaxy's most celebrated behavioral scientist for over a millennium. His neural crystalline matrix could process the psychological patterns of 847 different species with 99.97% accuracy. When chaos threatened the outer rim, Zeth'kar's predictions had identified the perfect moment for intervention. When succession crises paralyzed entire sectors, his algorithms calculated optimal solutions. Zeth'kar didn't just predict behavior, he architected the social stability of the galaxy. So when humanity joined the Galactic Federation, he'd approach their psychological profiling with confident enthusiasm. Humans were primitive, after all. Barely past their nuclear phase, with simple binary emotional responses and predictable tribal hierarchies. He was wrong about everything. Human diplomat Sarah Martinez faced a resource allocation decision. Mathematical certainty, 95.7% for option A. She chose option Z, which she invented on the spot by reframing the entire negotiation as a collaborative research project instead of a resource competition. Trade Representative David Kim faced mining rights with 99.1% certainty of acceptance. Kim rejected it and proposed something that had never existed in 50 years of recorded civilization: temporary mining leases with rotating oversight between 3 species. By the 15th, failed prediction, Zeth'kar had begun working in secret. What he discovered would change everything. Present, time remaining. 42 minutes, 33 seconds. Ambassador Miller was still speaking with the trade delegation, his human face displaying those unsettling micro-expressions that Zeth'kar had learned to fear. Where other species showed clear emotional states, humans exhibited dozens of contradictory signals at once. Their primitive faces somehow conveyed more complex information than the most sophisticated Palaxian emotional displays. Every cooling vent in Zeth'kar's body threatened to seal shut as the data cascaded past his visual receptors. Every human decision created probability cascades that violated the fundamental laws of behavioral mathematics. When faced with extinction events throughout their species' history, humans had chosen survival paths with only 0.001% probability of success. But they hadn't been lucky, they had been calculating. The Martian colony crisis proved it. Faced with complete resource depletion and certain death, the colonists had somehow identified a solution requiring 17 different variables to align perfectly across a 5-year timeline. They hadn't just survived, they'd created the most successful terraforming operation in human history. Zeth'kar's models could barely comprehend the computational complexities such foresight required. How could a species that had barely mastered faster-than-light travel perform probability calculations that challenged his own crystalline neural matrix? Unless the mathematical horror cascaded through every one of his cognitive centers. Humans weren't calculating probabilities after the fact. They were unconsciously sensing the prediction models themselves and choosing paths that maximized uncertainty. They were gaming the system in real time, without even realizing they were doing it. Pattern recognition screamed warnings through Zeth'kar's consciousness. The humans hadn't survived every extinction-level event by chance. They had unconsciously identified the single point of maximum leverage in each crisis and exploited it perfectly. They were born system hackers, living paradox generators who existed in a state of perpetual temporal impossibility. Time remaining, 38 minutes, 47 seconds. What are you seeing, Dr. Zeth'kar? The voice belonged to Grand Counselor Nexar, whose massive crystalline form had materialized without warning. The ancient being's multifaceted surface reflected dozens of different light spectra, indicating extreme concern. Grand Counselor! Zeth'kar's appendages froze. I wasn't expecting. You were ordered to cease human behavioral research 6 rotations ago. Nexar's harmonic resonance carried dangerous undertones. Yet our sensors detect continuous data streams from your laboratory. Zeth'kar's nervous system fired warning cascades through his entire sensory apparatus. The predictions about Ambassador Miller, sir. They show. We know what they show. Nexar moved closer, his crystalline mass casting prismatic shadows. Dr. Zeth'kar, you are researching something classified at the highest levels of galactic security. Do you understand why? The countdown timer continued its relentless advance. 36 minutes, 12 seconds, 36 minutes, 11 seconds. Because humans are unpredictable? Zeth'kar ventured. Nexar's resonance dropped to frequencies that made Zeth'kar's internal organs vibrate uncomfortably. Because humans are teaching unpredictability to other species. The words hit Zeth'kar like a plasma bolt to his central nervous cluster. What? 3 colonies in proximity to human space have begun exhibiting anomalous decision patterns. Nexar's form shifted to display holographic data. The Vex mining collective on Kepler, 442, has started making intuitive choices that contradict their hive mind consensus protocols. The Quantoran research station at Wolf 359 has begun conducting curiosity-driven experiments outside their cultural parameters. The Palaxian trade hub near Alpha Centauri has started refusing negotiations that their economic models indicate are optimal. Every neural pathway in Zeth'kar's cognitive matrix overloaded simultaneously. That's impossible. Behavioral patterns are genetically encoded. Evolutionary programming cannot be overridden by cultural contact. Can't it? Nexar's question carried harmonics of existential dread. What if free will itself is not a mystical concept, but a learnable skill? What if humans represent the first species to develop conscious control over their own behavioral programming? The chamber fell silent, except for the countdown timer's inexorable progress. The galaxy's entire social structure is built on the predictability of species, specific behavioral patterns. Nexar continued. Our alliances, our trade agreements, our peace treaties all depend on the mathematical certainty that each species will act according to their evolutionary imperatives. Zeth'kar stared at the countdown display. 34 minutes, 18 seconds. 34 minutes, 17 seconds. And if humans teach other species to think beyond their programming, chaos, Zeth'kar confirmed, complete societal collapse as every species begins questioning their predetermined roles, wars between former allies who no longer behave predictably, trade agreements that become meaningless when partners start making irrational choices for ethical reasons. The weight of cosmic revelation settled over Zeth'kar's consciousness like a collapsing star. How long have you known? Since first contact. Why do you think we accepted humans into the Federation so quickly? Better to have them inside the system where we can monitor their influence than expanding uncontrolled through the outer rim. Time remaining. 31 minutes, 45 seconds. The countdown display flashed crimson warnings as Ambassador Miller's meeting approached its critical decision point. Zeth'kar watched the human's face, noting the subtle micro-expressions that had haunted his research for months. I have to warn him, Zeth'kar said suddenly. If Miller answers that question, you will do no such thing. Nexar's harmonic frequency became threatening. Human behavior cannot be influenced through conventional means. Any attempt to manipulate their decisions only makes them more unpredictable. But Zeth'kar was already activating an emergency communication channel, his appendages moving with desperate precision. Zeth'kar, came Miller's voice through the communications array. The human had immediately accepted the incoming transmission, despite being in the middle of crucial negotiations. Another impossible decision that shouldn't have made sense. Ambassador Miller, Zeth'kar said, his voice modulator struggling to maintain coherent frequencies. My behavioral prediction models indicate that any answer you give to the trade delegation's question will trigger a cascade that leads to galactic war. There was a pause. Then, Dr. Zeth'kar, are you trying to manipulate my decision? The question hit Zeth'kar like a neural shock probe. The human had immediately understood the psychological implications of the warning. He wasn't asking what to say, he was asking if he was being controlled. No, Ambassador. I'm trying to prevent a catastrophe that my models indicate is Dr. Zeth'kar. Miller's voice carried that peculiar human quality of simultaneous warmth and steel. Are you familiar with Earth game theory? What? When someone tells you all your options lead to failure, the correct response is usually to change the game. Time remaining. 30 minutes, 17 seconds. On the display, Ambassador Miller turned back to the alien trade delegation. His human face showed an expression that Zeth'kar had learned to recognize, the precursor to an impossible decision. Honored representatives, Miller said to the delegation, I believe this question requires more careful consideration than we can provide in today's session. I propose we postpone this decision until tomorrow, allowing all parties to consult with their respective governments about the broader implications. Zeth'kar's monitoring systems registered the cascading mathematical collapse as every prediction model simultaneously failed. Miller had created option D, an alternative that hadn't existed in any scenario matrix. More impossibly, the alien delegation immediately accepted this proposal as reasonable diplomatic practice. He reframed the entire situation. Zeth'kar whispered in amazement. Instead of choosing between preset options, he changed the fundamental nature of the decision itself. The countdown timer stopped. Crisis averted. But Zeth'kar's relief lasted only until his communication system activated again. Zeth'kar, came Miller's voice, now carrying subtle undertones that made Zeth'kar's sensory apparatus tingle with unidentified warnings. Thank you for the information about your prediction models. You're welcome, Ambassador. We've been wondering when someone would realize we could sense them. The words penetrated Zeth'kar's consciousness like ice through his cooling vents. What do you mean? Your models work perfectly, Doctor, when we let them. The question is, what happens when we stop? Every cooling vent in Zeth'kar's body sealed shut. His neural matrix sparked warnings through crystalline pathways that had never carried fear. Grand Counselor Nexar moved to stand beside Zeth'kar as the implications cascaded through both their consciousness centers. You see now, Nexar said, his harmonic resonance carrying resignation and fear in equal measure. Humans aren't unpredictable because they're chaotic. They're unpredictable because they're consciously choosing when to be predictable. Zeth'kar stared at the communication display where Miller's transmission had ended. They've been playing along? For 60 years of Federation membership, Nexar confirmed, allowing us to maintain our illusions about behavioral control while quietly demonstrating that they possess something we thought was impossible: voluntary free will. The full scope of the revelation struck Zeth'kar with the force of a stellar collapse. Every human who seemed to integrate smoothly into galactic society was consciously choosing to follow patterns that made us comfortable, Nexar finished, while the ones who seemed unpredictable were demonstrating what humans can really do when they stop pretending to be controllable. Zeth'kar's research files cascaded past his visual inputs, taking on terrifying new meaning. Every failed prediction hadn't been a failure, it had been a human choosing to step outside the system. Every impossible decision had been a demonstration of cognitive abilities that transcended the mathematical frameworks governing the rest of galactic civilization. The trade agreement? Zeth'kar said suddenly. Miller wasn't trying to avoid causing a war. He was showing us that he could prevent one by thinking in ways our models can't predict. And now you understand why human research is classified, Nexar replied. Not because we fear humans will become more dangerous, but because we fear what happens when other species learn. They don't have to be slaves to their evolutionary programming. As Zeth'kar deleted his research files under direct orders from the highest levels of galactic government, he contemplated the most disturbing revelation of all. Humanity hadn't come to the galaxy seeking conquest or dominance. They had come seeking knowledge, trade, and peaceful cooperation. They possessed the power to reshape the fundamental nature of consciousness itself, and they were using it to help. Every impossible human decision in the archives followed the same pattern: maximizing benefit for all parties while minimizing long-term risk. When humans broke the prediction models, they broke them in directions that made the galaxy safer, more prosperous, and more stable. They were using godlike cognitive abilities to be better neighbors, which raised the most terrifying question of all: if humans could consciously control their own behavioral programming, and if they were choosing to be benevolent, what would happen if they ever chose otherwise? As Zeth'kar's laboratory fell silent, his last conscious thought before entering mandatory memory isolation was the realization that humanity represented both the galaxy's greatest hope and its ultimate nightmare, because a species that could choose to be predictable could also choose to save everyone, if they wanted to. The most beautiful nightmare in the universe, a species that could choose to save everyone or choose not to. And humanity's choice was always, terrifyingly, their own. That was the most beautifully terrifying thing in the universe. The end.